Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David, how you doing today?
Good, good. Looks like a nice day out there in Edmonton, and interesting day for the Edmonton Oilers. Something that had been long anticipated, heavily rumored. No surprise. James Neal was bought out today by the Edmonton Oilers. Bruce, you've been writing a lot about this. What would you say are the key implications of this buyout? Why do you think the Oilers did it, in your opinion? Why did they make this move?
Well, they signaled their intention to make this move. One could argue as early as 2 years ago when they acquired James Neal in exchange for the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse contract of Milan Lucic. And they were similar terms, similar cap hit. Oilers even took on additional obligations. But the one big saving grace of the Neal contract was that it was buyoutable. And the Lucic deal really was unbuyoutable due to its bonus structure. Peter Chiarelli really constructed a contract that was entirely in the player's favor in every imaginable aspect. And when the player stopped performing just a year and a half into his 7-year contract, the Oilers were on the hook for a huge obligation. So the deal to get Neal's deal was step one. And step two was at some future point down the road, it only made sense that Edmonton was going to buy that out to at least create some cap space to move forward. And now with 2 years to go in it, they've basically bought $3.8 million in cap space for each of the next 2 years at the cost of having an additional cap penalty of $1.9 million for the 2 years that follow. So it's just a massive mistake by Peter Chiarelli that the club is going to continue to pay for until 2025.
It's his biggest mistake by far. Biggest mistake by even more than the Griffin Reinhart trade. A first-round pick may or may not work out. If you look at the picks taken around that pick, the 15th overall pick, a lot of them worked. Some of them worked out spectacularly. Others not so much. So it was a mistake. I'm not saying this isn't a mistake. I'm just weighing the mistakes. The Lucic mistake was such a mistake, Bruce. Mm-hmm. It prevented, first of all, they had a winger who fit with Connor McDavid and Patrick Maroon.
Yep.
They couldn't keep him because they signed Milan Lucic in the end. Yep. I think that was the main reason they couldn't keep Patty Maroon. How would the Oilers franchise have been different if that hadn't happened? It precipitated the Taylor Hall trade. I think that I think the Oilers got a really good player back at Adam Larsson, and I think that trade was kind of a wash. The Devils got a win out of it. So did the Oilers in the end. Adam Larsson fulfilled his end of the bargain for the Edmonton Oilers, but it precipitated that trade. That trade might have happened anyway, though, because they needed a right shot D-man and they were been desperate for years. But Lucic just was terrible in Edmonton in the end. He had one okay season and then he was terrible. And, I, as a devil's advocate on this buyout, the Oilers, there's the idea that you need gritty veterans in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And James Neal could be one of those. He was in his first playoffs in Edmonton, less so this year. This year, there was some talk he had long COVID and was weakened throughout the season. May be the case. We don't know that. We don't know all the story there. He had a great start with the Oilers and then tapered off. Nonetheless, Bruce, in terms of even strength scoring this year, James Neal for Oilers forwards, out of 15 Oilers forwards who played more than 200 even strength minutes, James Neal was 5th out of 15 for even strength scoring. Mm-hmm. That's the good news. The bad news is his rate of even strength scoring was really low. And the Oilers, after you got past the top two players, everyone let the Oilers down. Yamamoto, his even strength scoring was cut in half from the previous season. Nugent Hopkins' even strength scoring cratered, even though he played so much time with McDavid and Draisaitl. So James Neal's even strength scoring was marginally better than the unbelievable number of Oilers players who underperformed at even strength. But it certainly did not merit the salary that he was going to get next year. And you can make the Oilers are, as we hear, the Oilers are all in right now, or that's the company line, and and there makes some sense to it. There's some sense to that. The Oilers are all in. So this is them going all in. They're going to spend this money in the next couple of years. Down the road, though, it makes it harder to compete for the Edmonton Oilers when they have to, and when they need. This is just 4 years. So I guess in terms of any new contract for Draisaitl or McDavid, this won't play into it in terms of cap space, although it might in the just in the years that Draisaitl's contract comes up and McDavid comes up, they have this cap penalty, which prevents them from being as competitive a team as they otherwise might have been. So there's that. Overall, Bruce, I support this move. I think that James Neal can still play in the NHL. He's a minimum salary kind of player. He's a veteran who could help a team in the playoffs. I still believe that, and might be able to, can chip in, like he's not that dissimilar from Corey Perry in terms of what he might bring to a team, I think. So a team looking for that kind of veteran would be well advised to sign James Neal. I think he's got a little bit of game left, just not obviously anywhere close to $5.5 million a year, or what was that? What it was? 5.5?
575.
$575 million a year, and not even half that. So it didn't make sense for a team to take him with the Oilers eating half the cap hit either, unless your Oilers were going to sweeten that. So that really made that a pretty poison pill for the Oilers to try to trade the contract. So overall, I support the buyout.
The Oilers were in the exact same conundrum when they bought out Andrei Sekera a couple of years ago, and he had 2 years to run at $5.5 million cap hit. And in order to trade the guy, even if they retained half, the other team would have to commit to 2 years at $2.75 million. And instead, the Oilers bought him out, and Dallas found him on the free agent market for 1 year at $1.5 million. And at that price, he performed for Dallas, but he was just way, way below because of injuries in his case, and you could argue in Neal's case that injuries and illnesses have devalued him. But the fact remains that when he arrived in Calgary, right after he signed that contract, the signs of erosion were very clear indeed. He had a very poor season for the Flames, and they flipped him after just the one season. So he turned 30. Next year, in fact, he was already 30 when he got to Calgary. Next year, he'll be 34. So I agree with you. Some team will pick him up on the free agent market, maybe not for minimum, but maybe for $1 million, 1.2. Maybe he'll get the Sekera money, but he won't get. His big paydays are over, and if he has some utility left, he'll be paid at that level, as opposed to what he was. Maybe Nashville will pick him off the free agent market and give him 2-year deal the way Edmonton did with Kyle Turris last year. But I honestly see James Neal being a year-to-year player. And I had half a thought that Edmonton might keep him and he might wind up on long-term injury reserve with this long COVID thing. But clearly that's not the diagnosis, and you need a legitimate medical opinion to do something like that, because that would have saved them a ton of hurt on the salary cap front if they'd been able to do that.
Well, maybe he had long-ish COVID, like, everyone's had that cold that lasts 3, 4, 5 months and wipes you out, or at least I have. People have that cold, but 6 months later you're fine. So maybe that's what the case. Anyway, we're just guessing on that. Bruce, the point you made up about Sekera got me thinking. The Oilers bought out Sekera. And he went on to have, I think, a pretty good year in Dallas as a bottom pairing D-man, and he's played top 4 part of the time. And then this year, not probably quite as good. Of course, he was never the same after that Ryan Getzlaf hit. But the Oilers at that point had a number of young defensemen that they needed to make roster space for, to see how Caleb Jones, for instance, was going to turn out as a player. So I really thought that, my level of support for that buyout was in part based on that. Is teams need to change. They need to get some younger players. There was cap relief from that deal in the short term, and so I could think along with the GM and see the thinking there. and they did give Caleb Jones a chance. He did get, I don't think anyone can say, and like there's lots of people unhappy Caleb Jones got moved out from Edmonton, particularly in that particular deal. But I think it is fair to say that Caleb Jones got an opportunity to prove himself in Edmonton and didn't really grab the bull by the horns. This time with this buyout, there is also a number of players who I think I would rather see in the lineup than James Neal for the Edmonton Oilers. There's both Tyler Benson and Cooper Marody top of that list. And if the Oilers hadn't had James Neal, we might have seen Marody and Benson get a chance this past season when that was their window. Yeah. Now they're competing against Holloway and McLeod, which is a good thing. Great to have competition like that. There's something to be said for gritty veterans on the wing in the playoffs. There's also something to be said for youthful energy, who get in there on the forecheck and get after it. Wing is not the most complicated position in the NHL. It is the least complicated position to play in the NHL. It's the least in terms of where you need experience. I think you really need it on defense, and you can use it at center and in net. On the wing, I'm less convinced that it's a priority for any team to have a bunch of experienced older wingers. I like my winger. I like them young and fast and quick, getting in there hard on the forecheck with high levels with the max peak skill. Peak skill happens for players in their 20s, not in their 30s. So I'm not against veteran wingers, but in this regard, I'm glad that space has been made for possibility for Tyler Benson to have a breakthrough or Cooper Marody to have a big breakthrough. And that's this much more likely now to happen with Neal gone, although they've created the cap space, of course, to bring in wingers who might rank ahead of Benson and Marody. So it could be a double-edged sword for them, this move today.
Well, Zach Hyman, I mean, he's clearly coming in.
Yes.
And he's clearly going to play left wing just because, I mean, the Oilers protected 4 right wingers in the expansion draft. So that, there's no holes on right wing. The spaces that are there are on the left side, at least as the roster is currently constructed. And Hyman is going to create more of a obstacle in one sense for those young guys to make it onto the team. In the other sense, James Neal was a bottom 6 winger. Zach Hyman's a top 6 winger. So what they're opening up here is, I mean, in the roster, you could say Hyman's actually replacing Dominic Cahoon.
Yes.
And, and getting paid like a top 6 winger, whereas Cahoon wasn't. He was,
Hey, say that again, that Hyman's replacing Dominic Cahoon, Bruce. Say that again, because it made me feel really good when you said that. So could you say that again?
Yeah. In the actual game night lineup, Zach Hyman has taken the spot of Dominic Cahoon.
Well, thank you for saying that. It really makes me feel good to hear that.
And a guy like Tyler Benson now has a shot at replacing the roster spot of James Neal. And now instead of spending $6 million on a bottom 6 winger and $1 million on a top 6, you flipped it, and you're actually paying the guy that's placed to deliver the goods and the numbers. So, I mean, obviously Hyman has to work out, but it's a more sensible arrangement of the cap space for sure.
And whatever reservations I have about the Hyman deal, which I've articulated, you've articulated your own. It's not in the first year of this contract. Nope. It's great to have Zach Hyman as your top line winger this year. It's freaking fantastic to have that. So that's why I feel some happiness here is in the next couple of years, I think he's a good bet to perform at a peak level. And that's really good for the Edmonton Oilers in the short term. And we'll see how it plays out in the long term. I mean, we've already expounded on that. So yeah, good luck to James Neal in another city. Mm-hmm. I liked his play in Edmonton. I thought he worked hard. I thought every time he was on the ice, you could count on him to get in there, forecheck, hit. He was a little bit slow getting in there on the forecheck. That's why he was taken out of the Winnipeg series, is that the Oilers would dump the puck in. Winnipeg would obstruct Chason and Neal. And then because both of them were slowed up, they didn't then have the speed, that explosiveness, skating ability to then get in on the forecheck and be effective. So the amount of obstruction took away their ability to be effective, and that's why both of them in the end, I think both ended up sitting in those. Chason was taken out of the lineup as
For
well.
game 3, and then he got back in game 4 when Archibald got suspended, and it was Chason, in fact, who scored the last goal of the season for the Oilers on the power play that gave them a lead in game 4 that they couldn't hold.
Yeah. So Devon Shore, the reason he's back and they're not is, frankly, I think, is he had the speed and the skating ability to get in on the fort, to be effective in that playoff game. And it just really turned the Oilers' heads that he did do that and other people didn't. And whether that's a good decision or a bad decision, we've already been over. Bruce, what else is on our list here? Do you have any final thoughts on Neal before we move on?
Just to wish him well, and I'm sorry we saw the wrong end of his career. And I mean, it's a sad fact that for the next 2 years, the Oilers will have listed under dead cap space both James Neal and Milan Lucic, with the cap retention for Lucic, and so there's still like almost $2.7 million in dead cap out of the the $6 million per year originally. So they're saving, but they're not saving all that much. At the end of the day, out of the $42 million in cap space that was committed to Milan Lucic, the Oilers will be tagged for over $40 million of it, and the savings are pretty marginal. But all of those savings are in the next 2 years.
Yeah, good luck to James Neal wherever he ends up. And we have a player, I think, in the system who may come and remind us very much of James Neal in the years to come. And I've got my fingers crossed on this. I think that Raphael Lavoie is a very similar player to what I remember from James Neal in his prime. James Neal was both of them
Shooter.
Big forwards, hard to the net, nasty, a bit of a mean streak, and great shooters of the puck. So we'll see how quickly. Lavoie is now in his second pro season. He played professional hockey in Sweden last year, and then in the AHL, where he acquitted himself. He was a little inconsistent. He had some good moments and bad moments in the AHL. I think it's clear he's going to start out in the AHL. But Raphael Lavoie, like, again, wingers don't need to spend. I don't think they need to spend forever in the AHL to become useful NHL players. I don't say that about defensemen or centers. I'm saying this about wingers. And Raphael Lavoie may be sooner than later. And same with Dylan Holloway, sooner than later on the Oilers wing. So there's, Neal moving out opens up opportunity for everybody. Marody, Benson, Lavoie. And the question is, how many wingers is Holland looking at bringing in? They have a need. It's clearly third line center has been talked about. It's a big need. There could be a need in net. There is a need in net. I think it would be a good idea to bring in another goalie if they could find the right goalie. And there's obviously a huge need, Bruce, on defense. Adam Larsson's departure. It's the third top four, arguably top pairing defenseman the Oilers have lost in the last 5 years. Andrei Sekera, essentially to injury, getting banged up by Ryan Getzlaf. Oscar Klefbom to injury, getting banged up in the 2017 playoffs. And being the Oilers' best player, I would argue, in that playoff run was Oscar Klefbom. Maybe Draisaitl, but Klefbom consistently. Draisaitl got better as it went along. Klefbom was fantastic from start to end of that playoff run till he got hurt. He never again attained that level of play as an Edmonton Oiler, and now he's out. Now they've lost Larsson. And we hear one of the reasons that Larsson's left is because his best buddy, Klefbom, got hurt and is no longer here. The impact on the Edmonton Oilers franchise of losing these three top four D-men in the last 5 years is immense, utterly immense. Some bad luck in a way. You expect injuries on defense. This is really bad. These are really bad injuries with massive repercussions on the Edmonton Oilers. And this thing with Larsson, it's still, let's say if things go wrong this year, Bruce, for the Edmonton Oilers, I think top of the list is going to be problems stopping the cycle, being a strong defensive team, maybe on the penalty kill, all those things that Larsson excelled at are going to be really missed. The ability to shut down top attacking forwards on the other team. So for me, this is the number one need, is finding that that defenseman to replace Adam Larsson, or a number of defensemen by committee to replace him. What do you think is what's your assessment in terms of big needs right now? What would you say?
Yeah, of the core 12, I would say the biggest need right now is certainly at right defense. They have, they got two youngsters under contract in Ethan Bear and Evan Bouchard, and really that's it for the right side of any kind of proven players, right? I mean, both Barry is going to market, it looks like, and Larsson's gone. And last year they had all four of those guys on the team the entire year. And, Bouchard was number 4 and he didn't play a lot. And he's going to get his opportunity, but ideally that would be on the third pairing, not the second. And ideally Bear would be on the second pairing, not the first, but who they got on right defense. So that's a huge need. And I'm really just not sure what's out there. I mean, you're hearing talks about, Hamonic. To me, at where he's at this point in his career, that's a definite step down from where Adam Larsson was. Hamonic's a good player, don't get me wrong, but he's further along the career curve and definitely on the receding down the hill side of it. And so, but that's sort of the player they're looking at. But most of the guys I see that are right defensemen that are out there are more third pairing guys than second pairing.
Yeah. So one alternative way to solve it would be to sign Tyson Barrie. So then you have the 3 right D who are already clearly are NHL players, and then look for that cycle buster, that shutdown defenseman as your third pairing left D. And I went through the free agent list. I'm just going to, and these are the players I kind of looked at as possibilities for the Oilers. Here's the quick list: Tyson Barrie, Brandon Montour, who's a UFA. Cody Ceci, he's a puck mover. Cody Ceci, is he kind of a shutdown guy? Is he a bit more physical? Ryan Murray, Travis Hamonic, Derek Forbert. Derek Forbert is a shutdown kind of
lefty. He's a lefty.
So he would be the third pairing. He'd be your third pairing guy on that side. And Patrick Nemeth, who's also a lefty. I think he's kind of a shutdown guy. Yes. Zdeno Chara, who is a lefty. Alexander Edler. Mark Pysyk, who is a right D, and David Savard, who's a right D, John Merrill, who's a lefty, Zach Bogosian, who's a right D, and he's a big kind of physical guy, Dmitry Kulikov, who's a lefty, Yanni Hakanpää. I like that name, Hakanpää. What a great name for a defenseman. Should be Hack and Slash, but Hakanpää will do. In today's NHL, Hakanpää is actually probably
Hack and Whack.
Hack and Whack.
Remember there was a defense pairing that were nicknamed Hack and Whack. Used to play with the Red Wings. I can't remember who they were, but that was a perfect nickname. It was two choppers,
What era? 50s, 60s?
Oh no, 90s. This was Harry Neal era.
Okay.
Bestowing nicknames on players.
Hack and Whack, Slater Cuckoo, and Tucker Poolman. Tucker Poolman being a right D. And Hakanpää, I think on a previous podcast I might have thought he was a lefty. He is a right D. I was incorrect if I said that. So there's some names there. None of them jump out at me, Bruce. Maybe David Savard of is the closest. And if they sign Savard on a big money, like if they give him enough money to entice him here on a short-term deal, that might be the play. But again, I'm not an expert at any of these. I think I can assess Tyson Barrie and Slater Cuckoo. I'm confident in doing that. None of the others, I want to say, should you put any weight, in my opinion, on their ability, because I don't really have that confidence myself to do it. But so I'm just going on kind of reputation and what people are saying about it, which can be misleading. So the ones I like on the list personally are, I like Alexander Edler. But I could be going more from memory than anything, but I still see him as a possibility if they were to go with Hamonic and Edler, for instance. Now, Vancouver's defense was kind of Swiss cheesy last year, but Quinn Hughes really struggled on defense himself. So I think that was one of the big issues. But Hamonic, And Edler by reputation are good defensive defensemen. Hamannik, the problem with Hamannik is he in terms of just staying healthy and getting into games, he struggled in recent years to do that. So someone else might mention Jason Demers as a possibility. That's another name. Pissick, the analytics people who put a lot of faith in shot metrics, stats, how the team does on the ice when that player's on the ice. His numbers, I think, are consistently, and including last year, really strong. So Bogosian, I don't know.
He's third pairing. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Who do you like?
Any personal solution. I mean, David Savard, I'm just looking at his page now, 6'2", 233. He's 30 years old, turning 31 in October. Just won the Stanley Cup. Over 600 games in his career, 20 minutes a night, including last year, basically he averaged 20 minutes a night. So still, playing top 4 minutes. That's kind of the dividing line between top 4 and not, is right around that 20-minute mark. He could play, and he's a fairly rugged player, not quite Larsson's hit machine, but he does play a big, heavy, like 233 pounds. That's a heavy guy. He plays a heavy game, and I just don't know what the price point will be. Is he a guy that'll just command huge bucks on the open market, or can they get him for 4x4, say?
Well, one interesting thing that we're hearing 4x4. One interesting thing that we're hearing to mention 4x4. We're hearing I'm hearing the rumors about Ryan Sutter. I'm listening to the various NHL insiders, and 4 years, I think it was Elliot Friedman, fact check me on that, but I listening to his podcast where Ryan Sutter was talked about. He's a Suter, not a Sutter. Okay. Yeah. He was talked about as 4-year deal, and who knows how much he's going to get, which is really interesting, Bruce, because one of the things that came up with Duncan Keith, which I thought was a fair comment, was, well, Ryan Suter suddenly was bought out the day after the trade was made for Keith. And people were saying we could get Ryan Suter for 1 year at like $1.5 million. It looks like there has been a certain underestimation by many people, probably maybe even including us, of what the market is going to be for a defenseman who can play some hockey. And people see Ryan Suter in that category, and he'll get 4 years. And I bet you he's going to get, just from the vibe, anyone who's going to get 4 years, I could see $3 million a year, 3.5. So he's not going to be, and he's only going to go to certain markets, of course. And we see this, we all tend to underplay the going to certain markets thing. I always think, players will come to Edmonton, right? They want to play with Connor McDavid, and that is the case. But we need a reality check in Canada and Edmonton on this. This is becoming if it wasn't a huge factor before. I mean, it wasn't in our heads that it was a huge factor before, even though we've read year after year after year that Edmonton kind of is one of the top places for players in terms of their no movement clause, including Edmonton on the list. I think we've been distracted because Tyson Barrie chose Edmonton and Milan Lucic chose Edmonton. So there are some players who clearly will choose Edmonton, but there's lots who won't. And the latest Exhibit A, well, there's Larsson. Exhibit A is Adam Larsson in that. But Exhibit B is hitting people in Vancouver over the head. They, what's the name? Schmidt. What's his first name? Nate Schmidt. Heck of a player. Like, I really like that player. Winnipeg worked out a deal just now for Nate Schmidt, and Nate Schmidt won't go to Winnipeg. He's invoked his no trade clause, and he's not moving to Winnipeg. So with all of these players that we're mentioning, and this is something that you and I don't know. We don't know actually how many players the Oilers are actually in the running for.
Right.
Are they, like we both favorably mentioned, David Savard? On all the lists, I don't see his name mentioned with Edmonton. I see it with Montreal, so he's willing to go to Canada. But I see no mention at all of the Edmonton Oilers. And so this is an unknowable for us, whether we're looking at a list. Let's say I mentioned 12 names there. Maybe the list of that 12 is just 3.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, Lucic and Barrie that you mentioned willing to come to Edmonton, they're both Western Canadian boys. Yes. Ryan Suter's from Madison, Wisconsin. Has played his entire career in the United States, lived his entire life in the United States, played for Team USA. He's 36 years old. He's set for life just with what he's getting paid in his buyout, let alone the tens of millions he made before that. And so he really gets to pick his destination point. You really think it's going to be Edmonton? I would put the chance of pretty much 0.0%.
Yeah.
Suitor come to Edmonton.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
Yeah. And for all we know, David Savard's 1%. Like, or they'd have to have a fairly massive overpay. I think you can get players. You can get Mark Fane or Benoit Pouliot to come to Edmonton. It might not be their first choice, but you pay them at least 1 year in term over market and maybe $500,000 over the each year over the life of the contract. That's how you typically the Oilers win a free agent. I mean, it's typically how most teams win free agents is overpay on term and one or the other or both. So it's not that unusual. And I don't want to overstate it either that this is an issue, but it clearly is an issue. And so when people like Bob Stauffer or Mark Spector bring it up, they're often painted as carrying water for management or apologists for management. No, they're delivering. Don't shoot the messenger here is what is kind of hit home with me in the last week. Is these guys are actually telling us something that is true, that they're hearing constantly, and it's not just an excuse. It's a reality, and it hit home in painful fashion with Adam Larsson leaving this past week.
And the other aspect is that people are saying, well, 4 times 4, Larsson could have signed for that here. And yet I read one report from someone who seemed to know what he was talking about, saying that the difference in taxes between Washington State, which apparently has basically 0 taxes, and Alberta, which has relatively low taxes, but it was something like 700,000 out of the 4 million.
It's a lot of money.
That's a lot of dough. So the Canadian teams are paying this huge premium in addition to this. Don't want to go to Canada. Well, one of the reasons they don't want to go to Canada is those tax implications, and it's one of the reasons that we find more and more talent sort of heading further south in the United States, and we see the Stanley Cup heading in the same direction.
Yeah, so I guess as fans, is for myself, what I'm going to be doing in the future is when I hear that argument, I'm not going to immediately discount it and say, oh, that's just an excuse or that's carrying water for the team. I'm going to say, oh, that I'm going to put some weight in that. That could well, that has the air of reality, and I'm going to think, okay, this tax issue is real and it's ongoing. The Canadian winter is, as Cal Nichols always used to say, we don't have palm trees. We don't have the palm trees, and we're not getting them, Bruce.
Don't have the beach either.
What they were selling in Edmonton, what Edmonton's selling, and I were talking to Nichols and Patrick Laforge about this, was what Patrick Laforge referred to as, in a brilliant feat of salesmanship, as the pure hockey experience. This is what the Oilers had, this kind of intense, like if you wanted that to live and breathe hockey, if that was your personality and nature, and it is for many of these individuals, right? They're fanatics. The pure hockey experience. Now, Patrick, though, made that argument before the age of social media, where it was a little different, the intensity, I think, of the pure hockey experience. Whatever that was in 2006 or 2007, it's something completely different in 2021. And the pure hockey experience now involves incessant evaluation, public evaluation by tens of thousands of people publicly, and can be quite harsh and overwhelmingly harsh to some players, or at least unpleasant. So this is the pure hockey experience in terms of selling that to players might be a little more difficult.
That would be a harder sell. And unfortunately, every year that goes by without the Oilers achieving some sort of significant level of success, which I would say goes beyond making the playoffs, but actually doing something in the playoffs, makes that sell a little bit harder. Here they've got the best pair of players, I would say, anywhere in the NHL. And yet the struggle to build a supporting cast around them just remains this epic battle. And they haven't been winning it. I won't call it a losing battle yet, but I will say that it's taken a long time to climb that mountain.
It's an excellent point, Bruce, because I think the pure hockey experience, if you have a winning team in Canada, could be overwhelmingly positive for a player, for every player, like in a way that it isn't in the United States. Like if your team wins the Stanley Cup in the Forest and nobody hears, did it even happen? Like sometimes I get that feeling with like teams in Anaheim when they win, like, they're, teams in Tampa. Like in Montreal, there was a Montreal reporter who contrasted the rioting in Montreal after they won a game to the streets in Tampa after Tampa had won the Stanley Cup, and nothing was going on in Tampa. No one was in the streets. Nobody was celebrating. It's a much different experience in Canada when you win, but you got to win to have that great feeling. And it brought to mind Ken Dryden's experience in Montreal in the 1970s. I just read the game again. If not read the game or listened to the audiobook, highly recommend it. Best book ever written on hockey. And he was talking about his experience of after a win in Montreal and going to the bank and picking up the paper from the paper boy, buying something at the convenience store, and no one would necessarily say anything, but they would look at them, and Ken Dryden's thought is, they know. And he was experienced like the collective euphoria of everybody knowing that he had achieved something significant. And by them knowing it made it more enjoyable, more pleasurable, more significant. So a Canadian market could have that going for it, and does have that going for it when the team is successful. It's when things go sour that the negativity is far more intense than other markets. So you get these extremes of emotion that you're going to find lacking. And that's always been the case, but it's heightened now. And when you have a losing team like the Oilers have been over the last 15, off and on 15 years. And I think the fear in Edmonton is heightened by the fear that Connor McDavid will leave Edmonton. And so that makes it everything's even more intense here because of this, I think a well-founded fact reality of the NHL these days is players aren't on the same team their entire careers. And so the winning window really is now. So.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that in Edmonton, with due respect to the Elks, who haven't even seen the field for a long time, hockey is really I won't quite say the only game in town, but it's a big game in town where the Oilers are in the top professional league. I mean, Tampa Bay, they won the Cup. Well, guess what? The Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. The Rays went to the World Series. That's probably when you saw people spilling out onto the streets in celebration and exuberance compared to, they've obviously had a great run of it, but it's, when you have these towns with 3 and 4 major sports in them, 5 if you want to include soccer in some of these cities. I mean, hockey is just struggling to get a piece of the action. Whereas in Edmonton, it's all hockey all the time. It's a consuming thing, and it's a consuming thing even in July and August when they're not playing games, as you and I know. Just
Here we are.
Indeed.
And everyone listening to this podcast here, you guys are, like, you guys and the men and
Thanks
women
for
listening to this podcast. Yeah. Indeed. Thanks for listening. Bruce, Jonathan Willis worked out that they have about $10.5 million in cap space, and a number of things factoring into that. He was already saying, okay, you got the Hyman contract, you got Yamamoto signing a new contract, you got Benson and Marody being qualified. He's also anticipating Kyle Turris and Alex Stalock to be sent down to the farm.
Yep.
So you have these you have all those things happening, and when you factor all that in, you have about $10.5 million left for whatever Oilers needs have. So they, in theory, they could go with the goalies that they have with Koskinen and Smith. That may well be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have, for these defensive needs and for whatever needs you have at forward, you have, and it's just a couple players probably that you want to sign. I don't think you want to sign. Yeah, I think you want to sign 2 forwards, maybe 3, 2 defense, maybe 1. So it's probably, I'm going to guess 3 to 4 signings, and probably one of them's at a minimum contract. So they've got some money to spend.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe no one to spend it on. Which other winger might they get? I guess they could spend money on Thomas Tatar. They could spend like $4 or $5 million on a short-term contract with Tatar. Getzlaf. They could bring in Ryan Getzlaf as your third line center and pay him $3.5 to $4 million for 1 or 2 years. That's the number I heard mentioned. I think I heard that mentioned on Oilers Now.
Yeah, he'd be 3+ for sure. I would have to think Getzlaf.
Yeah. So there's other
but
wingers.
You know what? If you want a good 3C, you're going to have to be prepared to pay him. I mean, you want to expect Ryan McLeod to step up and do that job. I mean, that's a core 12 position. I've pointed out in the past, that it's become at the top echelon a $5 million job. You want to look at Jean-Gabriel Pajot or Yanni Gourde, who to me are, top level 3Cs, arguably they almost 2Cs, or what Philip Danault is negotiating for. You're talking about $5 million. And I'm not sure the Oilers have $5 million. I'm not sure there's many players on the market, Danault notwithstanding, who fit quite in at that level. But Getzlaf, in his declining years, he still has game, as near as I can tell. And I will issue the standard caveat that all players who played on American teams last year, I did not see a lot of them. I was so focused on the Canadian division. And of course, the Oilers didn't play any of those teams. And that's typically when you get a lot of information about opponents, is when you're playing them. So
Getzlaf even strength scoring last year, Bruce. He ranked 349th out of 432 NHL forwards, 1.15 points per game, which is, that's like fourth line level. But if he's playing defense at a high level, center's a key defensive position. And if he was getting the job done defensively, he could still be a very valuable player for a team. So even though if his even strength scoring has cratered like that, which it looks to be the case, that's pretty much cratering. That's replacement level kind of.
5 goals, 12 assists, and a big double-digit minus for the third year in a row. But bear in mind that the whole Anaheim team has been in the crapper for a while now. So he may be looking for a chance to play on a team that's a little better than Anaheim. Whether he chooses Edmonton, at least we know he's a good Western Canadian boy, that he won't just rule it out of hand. He may be, 16 years in California, maybe he likes the taxes and the whole American thing, that he would prefer to go to an American team. But anyway, it's at least he would consider it. You'd have to think. But
I wonder if it's over money, or if the move is over kind of one last gasp for this player at the Stanley Cup for, to reach that height. Because to move would be a significant thing, and moving, you have to have a really good reason. So I think that maybe the notion that he is pursuing Stanley Cup glory might be the main driver of such a move, and Edmonton is not a bad choice in that regard if that's your goal. And so if they went $3 million on him, the one, Tyson Barrie was a top 4 D man. If they lose him, it'll be another top 4 D man that the Oilers lose within this same period of time. And you can argue how good he was. I don't think he was very good on defensive all. He was fantastic on the attack, and he fits in well. If you're going to go with Nurse and Barrie, that Nurse and Barrie hang in there as top pairing, or they do well. They did well together, well enough together that if you spent, let's say, $4 or $5 million on Barrie, $3 million on Getzlaf, $1 million or so on Forbert, for instance, if you're going to have to get then the left side D man who's a cycle buster player,
right?
We'll see what happens. It's hopefully we're going to get pleasantly surprised like we were last year with Tyson Barrie. Hopefully we'll have that moment where it's like, wow, that's great. And maybe we won't. Maybe we will find out soon. Any final thoughts, Bruce?
Yeah. Well, one thing I thought of is that I finally found a good use for the Mikko Koskinen $4.5 million 1 year left on his contract business. And that is this: if they stick with the goalies that they got, which is Mike Smith, Mikko Koskinen, Alex Stalock, they got 3 NHL caliber goaltenders. And when they get to the start of the season, they have to figure out a way to keep Oscar Klefbom's contract on the roster for full cap space flexibility. They have to figure out a way to keep Oscar on the roster for 1 day, and they could solve that problem in one fell swoop by waiving Mikko Koskinen on the first day of the season, stashing him in the minors, making, I think, the fairly safe assumption that nobody's going to claim him at full ticket. But even if someone does, well, they got Mike Smith and Alex Stalock, and that's who they would start. Their season starting roster would be Mike Smith and Alex Stalock, and with Koskinen on waivers, they could actually place Oscar Klefbom on the roster, and then on day 2, send him to the minors, send him to long-term injured reserve, and they wouldn't have that big headache they had last year, the dollar for dollar thing. That was such a pain in the butt last year.
So he can go on waivers. Can you place players on waivers who have a no trade contract? Like if you have a no trade contract,
it's not a no movement clause. It's only a no movement that restricts.
But how does that work if someone then selects you that's on the no trade list? Are you sure? So we may get.
That's my understanding of it. No, I'm not.
We know of players with no trade contracts who have been on waivers in recent years.
No trade.
How do you send them to the minors? Like, so we know of players with no trade clause, because Koskinen has no trade clause, right? So we know of players with no trade clause who have been sent to the minors. And to be sent to the minors, don't you have to be put on waivers first?
To be sent to the minors, yes.
So with a no trade clause, you can be sent to the minors. To be sent to the minors, you must go on waivers. So there must be a way for players with no trade clauses to be put on waivers. And then, but what if some team on your list then takes you? How does that work? Anyway, maybe someone.
Original Posar will tell us exactly where we went awry. And I should have DM'd him before this podcast when that idea occurred to me. I thought, oh, well, at least that's one little bit of value that Oilers can extract from that Koskinen millstone, is that it would resolve the Klefbom situation. But maybe I should double check the CBA. I'm sure it's in there, clause 37, section 463. Somewhere in there, it's obviously spelled out. So
yeah, that would. So if it's there, that it would amount to you can't send a player with a no trade clause to the minors, is how that would work then. And I don't know if that's the case or not.
I know movement clauses are off the board.
Yeah, so I was about to exclaim that your suggestion was brilliant, because it's on the face of it, Bruce, that sounds like a brilliant solution to a problem. And then I thought before I say that with any kind of certainty, because we have been corrected a number of times, thankfully corrected by original Posar, who's a very, very astute observer of all things CBA related, and we are not. So I just thought, oh my, is this one where we're going to get caught up and found out? As you can research that a little bit because I'll give my final thought here, Bruce. One of the things, I'm going to write a little post about this because it's kind of charming and will make everybody feel good in Edmonton. It made me feel good when Zach Hyman is leaving, and what's been fascinating is on Twitter is the number of kind of little love letters from Toronto Maple Leaf fans to Zach Hyman. So many people adore this player. Now, of course, there's the hard-headed people who look at hockey aging curves and drop in performance, and when you do that, you start to look at the Hyman taking a long-term deal in Edmonton in a different way. But if you're just looking at Hyman right now as a player and what he gave for the Leafs over the term of his career, how he grew as a player there are people who love this player, admire the heck out of this player, and one after another, they're kind of penning these very fond posts about Zach Hyman, the player, right now. So I'm going to write a post about that, probably maybe in the next couple of days, and just summing up what some of these people are saying. Have you had any insight onto the issue, or is? Oh, you're quiet suddenly, Bruce. I can't hear you. Did your mic turn off?
Yeah, I did, so people couldn't hear me tapping away on my keyboard. It's back. According to Puckpedia, another excellent source, they say no movement clauses. A player cannot be traded or placed on waivers without permission. Waivers are needed to send a player to AHL, but no trade clauses. Just says a player cannot be traded without permission. It shows no such restriction about him being placed on waivers. So, you can say, don't trade me to this other team, but if you get sent on waivers, then, if you play poorly enough or so I think it's a feasible alternative. As for Zach Hyman, I had a nice conversation with my brother, Earl, who lives in St. John's, Newfoundland, lifelong Leafs fan. We all grew up Leafs fans, but I moved to Edmonton 50 years ago. It was the same year that the WHA was first announced by Gary Davidson, Ben Hatskin, Bill Hunter, and so on. And so I still was a Leafs fan until the merger, and then I had to choose, and it was an easy choice, especially the way the Leafs tried to screw over the Oilers at that time, and the way Harold Ballard was embarrassing the human race, let alone the National Hockey League, was an easy choice. Anyway, my brother's still a big Leafs fan, watches every game, and he had some very encouraging things to say about Hyman as being a terrific forechecker, F1, first guy in the zone, very hard on the puck. He said, what he isn't is a great distributor of the puck. That his when he wins puck battles, his sort of first instinct is to take it to the net himself, or to fire away, as opposed to feed it from the corner to teammates. So that's something to watch for. That
I actually like that, Bruce. That made
Mhm.
me like him more, not less.
Okay.
Because I think that's to play with Connor McDavid.
Mm-hmm.
One of the common problems we see with players with McDavid is that they give up the puck too much to him. But a player who will actually get the puck, win the puck, and put it at the net, that creates chaos. That shakes the box. That's a good play, putting it at net. So a guy who's got the instinct and the confidence to just hammer it at the net when you're playing with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner.
Mm-hmm.
I'm liking that. Did your brother say anything else about it?
Yeah, well, just he said that the concern is his he's got some hard miles on him already, and he's had knee injuries the last couple of years that cost him some time, and obviously that's a chronic thing. That's a huge concern when you're
yeah
putting 7 or 8 years in a player. And I have to say, I have the thought. I mean, people are saying, well, pay the 8 years because you really want the first 4 years, and then what happens after that is of no significance. Well, that was the thought in the mid 2010s when the Oilers paid big money for Benoit Pouliot in the summer of 2014, and bigger money for Andrei Sekera in 2015, and bigger still money for Milan Lucic in the summer of 2016. And guess what? They all basically got bought out, or became financial burdens for the team that still reside on the under dead cap space to this day. And so that's the price you pay for, you talk about the price you have to pay. The price you have to pay for long-term contracts for guys entering their 30s is a very likely financial and salary cap, particularly pain down the road. So that's obviously the concern here.
I think that's in terms of I had a pretty negative reaction to the Hyman thing initially. And I think a lot of Oiler fans did. And I think a lot of us are kind of top of mind when we think of long-term contracts right now, are the deals you just mentioned, and Mark Fane being another one, and Andrew Ferentz, and just about every free agent contracts, Eric Belanger, that the Oilers have signed in the last 10 years has blown up in the Oilers' face, often dramatically. We haven't had one. We haven't had that countervailing one, at least that maybe there is one that really worked out brilliantly, where they long-term big money and they brought a player in. It's like, wow, that was a good idea. And that does happen as well. Like that sometimes happens. It's not that common, but it does happen. So I think because of all that, we in Edmonton, we are particularly sensitive and negative, just as a general rule, about this kind of contract that Zach Hyman is signing. Now, on the day of, there's often euphoria, and there will be when this, I think, generally speaking, there's going to be, I did a poll, about 60% of the fans were in favor of the deal, bringing Hyman in right now, which I think is rising. I think that number's going up as
I do too.
As it's getting closer to it. So, but I think if fans are wary about this deal, we have good reason to be wary, and no need to apologize for anyone if you have that reaction here in Edmonton. I think it's entirely valid, based on hard based on a lot of painful experience as a
based
fan.
on scar tissue.
Yeah, indeed.
So was it you that wrote a post that said of 60 long-term contracts over the years, 30 of them ended with the guy either injured or bought out?
I don't know if that I've done that kind of look at
Mm-hmm.
power forwards, and about half of them really end
Mm-hmm.
poorly. But that I don't know if I said that in particular.
And
But
that doesn't even include the unbuyoutable ones that, where the guy, they have to keep paying the guy because they've structured the contract in such a way they can't buy him out. But it was a pretty harsh statement, that half of them, that's not just failing to cover the bet. That's a spectacular burning, going down in flames failure. And
yeah, and it's funny. Like you'd have to look at, like, any time you invest in a contract in a player, like, it's always risky with NHL players. We saw this with Oscar Klefbom. I mean, how many years did we fans crow about? And it was listed as one of Schraly's great successes was signing Oscar Klefbom. I think it was Schraly who signed that to
yep,
that long-term deal. One of the
yep, we got
first
this
things
value
orders of business.
contract.
Yeah, and we were all like pounding on our chest and yippee-yi-yang about it, and with good cause. And then, so to fully judge these UFA contracts, you have to judge all the contracts that get signed and put them into proper context. But it does seem, when you look just at these contracts, that it's at best a 50-50 bet that you're going to get even decent value, any kind of good value. That is like the 50% that don't work out really just totally blow up in your face. And then the 50% that kind of work out, some of them kind of like there's the kind of worked out, and then like really worked out. And that really worked out number for those long-term contracts of players heading into their 30s. What's your guesstimate on how many of that really, really work out? Including players who sign with their own teams, let's say.
That changes the equation. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, okay.
if you're
Let's not
talking
include.
about young players that sign long
No.
term with their team, you're talking about
Just players.
in their late
Players.
20s.
Players in your late 20s signing a long-term
Okay.
deal, where the vast majority of it in your 30s.
Yeah.
What do you think of in terms of like really, really working out where the player is near peak at least through the life of the contract?
10%.
I was
20,
going to say 10% as well.
20
Yeah.
at best. So, and this is my concern entering this summer is that Ken Holland has committed 2 years to Duncan Keith, age 38 and 39, 2 years to Mike Smith, age 39 and 40, probably 7 years for Zach Hyman, ages 29 to 35, 8 years to Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, ages 28 to 35, and almost all of the future years that he's bought in each of those deals is for 30-plus-year-old seasons. And, that's a lot of commitment to older players.
And it gets to be, if you have then younger players coming up who need to get paid, as Toronto just found out,
Mm-hmm.
They signed John Tavares to this kind of contract that we're talking about. And the consequence of signing John Tavares is you can't sign Zach Hyman right now.
Right.
And the consequence of all of these contracts, if Dylan Holloway, Samorukov, Broberry, Bouchard, Yamamoto, Puljujarvi, if all of these players really pan out, there's a consequence then. So we'll see how it goes, Bruce. We'll see how it goes. Excuse me. Alrighty. Good podcast. Good to talk to you again.
Yep. Real excitement. I guess starts tomorrow with the unrestricted free agencies starting. And as we've learned in recent years, the big money and the big action happens on day one, but the big value happens down the road. So hopefully Holland will leave a couple of arrows in his quiver to make some value signings. I mean, the Hyman one looks like it's going to probably be announced tomorrow morning at 10:01 a.m. Like it's all but a done deal. And with the trade with Toronto having fallen through, it looks like it'll be 7 years at 5.5, and we'll see what the exact details are when the time comes. But that time's coming real soon.
Just give me 1 second here, Bruce. I'm just seeing some breaking news, and I just want to get to the bottom of it before we move on, because I want to confirm.
Breaking.
Mark Spector writes, so Holland has plenty of cash to fill his shopping list of a left winger for Connor McDavid, a third-line center to help with the maturation of young Ryan McLeod, a right defenseman to replace the departed Adam Larsson, a third-pairing left defenseman, and a couple of depth forwards. Oh, and a goalie, which he'll pay for by buying out Mikko Koskinen in the second buyout window next month. So Spec is reporting, sounds like he's talking about with some confidence here, of the Oilers buying out Koskinen as well in the second buyout window. Now, you and I have tried to work through how that might happen. It has to happen by the Oilers taking someone to arbitration.
Cooper Marody is the only one with arbitration rights, and according to original Pozar, that even if they don't go through the process, that he simply files for arbitration would open that window for the Oilers. But
so if he refused, let's say Marody refuses his contract and says, "No, I'm going to take you to arbitration," he works it out with the team. Maybe he gets a little sugar for doing that, sweetener for doing that. Like, we'll give you an extra $500,000, Cooper. Or not $500,000, but $50,000 or something like that.
We'll give you a one-way.
We'll give you a one-way
contract.
Yes.
Yeah, something like
that would be, hey, well, maybe that could happen then, right? And that you can then buy out Koskinen.
So you collude with the player to take you to arbitration, and then you settle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like you negotiate with Zach. Well, that was allowed. Sorry, excuse me. That's not just like that. That was allowed to negotiate with Zach Hyman ahead of time by Toronto. Yeah, you do that. You pull a Tampa Bay and you stretch the rules as far as you can, and you try to take advantage of it. So people will think of that what they will.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's one way to do it, and I mean, we'll see about the goalie. I mean, due respect to Spector. He also had Larsson re-signing 4 years times $3.9 million here a couple of weeks ago, and
he got the term and the number right.
Yeah, basically, just they got the team wrong. You know, and I mean, it's always it's nothing's for certain. I mean, that may be what they're planning to do, and I guess we'll find out. But
it probably comes down to they have this money to spend. If they can't spend it, and I think they need to spend it, right? They want to spend it. So if you can't spend it on a D-man or a forward that makes sense, then you sign Linus Ullmark, or you trade, who's going to be expensive, or you trade for Darcy Kemper, and then he's got $4.5 million left, and that's expensive on top of probably buying out Koskinen. Well, you save money from buying out Koskinen, but it's expensive then to get a goalie. So I could see them. This is a definite possibility. Spector has good sources. He had, I think he had the contract right. He had the term right. He just was expecting it to go through in Edmonton. It went through somewhere else. So he was half right, half. He was wrong on a pretty big piece of it. But anyway, he has great sources, Mark Spector. He often gets it right. So I think this is a credible. I'm going to put it in the category of, is it going to happen? Well, we'll find out. But is this a credible rumor? Is this a stated intention that Mark has on, off the record from someone that is real? I'm going to say that's definitely the case. And that's an interesting thought.
Well, it would open up $3 million in cap space in this upcoming season, but it would incur a cap penalty of 1.5 in the immediately following season, just when the Nurse and Bear and Puljujärvi extensions are set to kick in. So that has less of a payoff for the Oilers. It might, it'll open space for 1 year, but it'll, the year following they'll be still paying Koskinen, and they'll still be paying for another goalie.
And Mikko Koskinen is 1 year off being a good NHL goalie. He had a 917 save percentage. He was a good NHL goalie that year. He was a good NHL goalie last year after the start of the season, when he was called upon to play every game and hadn't played that much in quite some time, was a bit rusty. But after Mike Smith came back, Mikko Koskinen played pretty well, did he not? So, I'm ambivalent about this. I can see them leaving it open as an option if they can't use their money on anyone else, and it makes sense to use it as a goalie, then this buyout would make sense. But they do have other needs where they need to bring in players. There might not be the opportunity, though, Bruce, to spend to get a quality right D that's worthy of that amount of money. So maybe that's why they're keeping that open.
Yeah, a couple other big pieces of news today. Marc-Andre Fleury traded to Chicago for effectively nothing. What do you expect me to get him for nothing? Question does come to tip of tongue, I have to say, because Chicago did get Fleury for just a contract going the other way. And, when you think of what the Oilers paid, in addition to the taking on the full cap hit for Duncan Keith, it kind of riles a little bit. But anyway, Chicago got Fleury, and now Fleury is saying he's thinking about his future. This is fresh off a Vezina Trophy win, of course. Here's another one. Capitals announced 5-year deal for Alexander Ovechkin. Talked about your long-term contracts for older players. AAV $9.5 million. This will take him to his age 40 season. Now, Ovechkin's a rare case. He signed a 13-year deal way back in 2008, and he covered the entire bet. He is an absolute phenomenon, but can he carry it on for another 5 years at that rate? Holy.
Huh. Here's a funny one for you. Because what I'm hearing out of Vancouver, at least fans, I don't know what the Canucks management are expecting, but they're expecting something back for Nate Schmidt. Like they think they'll trade Nate Schmidt and get something. But I'm just reading here when Nate Schmidt was traded to, the news is when he was traded to Vancouver, the news was the Vancouver Canucks have acquired defenseman Nate Schmidt from the Vegas Golden Knights. For a 3rd-round draft pick. So they did give up a 3rd-round draft pick when they got him. So maybe that's not crazy. But Schmidt's value has got to be less because he didn't play particularly well in Vancouver this past year. He didn't have the shine on him like he certainly had in Las Vegas. So I don't know what they're expecting this year for Nate Schmidt. Maybe the market though
is a win at this point. I mean, they got OEL and they're paying him, right? But anyway, and then one last item, or at least from my end, Dhaliwal out in Vancouver says the Canucks are really concerned about an offer sheet for Elias Pettersson.
So many rumors, Bruce, right now. So many rumors, eh? Like it's just that would warm my heart.
Seattle could go after him.
Oh yeah. Well, they'd give up all those picks though.
Yeah.
Which could be high picks because, of course, if you have Elias Pettersson on that team, it's suddenly a very different team than it looks right now. Because right now it doesn't look to me like honestly anywhere close to a playoff team. But they have all this cap space to spend. Mm-hmm. Now, would you want to give up what would probably be 5 first-round draft picks in compensation to bring in? Because
I don't know what the dollar value. It keeps going up and up. I think it's close to $10 million now to pay the full 4 first-round picks.
I think so too. Is it 4 picks? Yeah. Now Pettersson might be worth that.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking up compensation for RFAs.
Right.
I don't know if I can find it. Anyway, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, or Hughes. I heard Hughes is also a free agent, is he not? And RFA could be offer sheeted. So both of those guys could be offer sheeted, which would either way is good news for an Oiler fan if that were to happen. So
Vancouver matches, but they have to pay through the nose to do it. It's
yeah.
Not the worst case scenario for the rivals.
All righty, let's leave it there, Bruce. Good talking to you.
Yep, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.